Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the soft glow of candlelight, the kind that flickers against rough-hewn log walls and casts long, gentle shadows across a world that's both impossibly distant and oddly familiar. You're not just listening to a story, you're stepping into the hush of a Kentucky night, where a young boy named Abraham Lincoln curls up on a straw mattress, the scent of wood smoke lingering in the air. If you are hoping to keep up with every twist and turn of Lincoln the Life, well, you might need a second cup of chamomile, because this journey is as winding as the creeks outside his childhood home. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you were listening from and what time it is for you. There's something soothing about knowing we all drifting off together, scattered across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. You wander through the chilly hush of a Kentucky evening, the kind where the stars seem to press close against the roof of a log cabin. The world is quiet, save for the occasional creak of timber and the distant call of an owl. You imagine yourself as young Abraham, toes poking out from a threadbare blanket, listening to the low murmur of his mother's voice as she tells stories by the flicker of a tallow candle. The scent of the earth and the smoke from the hearth mingle in the air, a perfume of hardship and hope. This is a world where books are rare treasures, and every page is a doorway to another life. Lincoln's mother, Nancy, spins tales from the Bible and Aesop's fables, her words weaving a gentle cocoon around the boy's restless mind. You picture him, eyes wide, absorbing every lesson, every moral, every quiet miracle hidden in the stories. Scholars still debate whether it was the cadence of these bedtime tales or the rhythm of the wilderness outside that shaped Lincoln's lifelong love of language, but you can almost hear the echo of his mother's voice in the speeches he one day gave. The well-known literary fact here is that Lincoln, even as president, often quoted the Bible and Shakespeare, drawing on the stories and verses he'd heard in these candlelit beginnings. But here's a quirkier detail. Young Abe was notorious for borrowing books from neighbors, sometimes walking miles through mud and snow to return a single volume. Once, he accidentally soaked a borrowed book during a rainstorm and spent days working off the debt by shelling corn for the owner. Exactly your average library find. You settle deeper into the straw mattress, feeling the scratch of the ticking and the gentle ache in your legs from a day spent helping with chores. The world outside is vast and uncertain, but inside this cabin, the warmth of family and the comfort of stories offer a kind of peace. You might even chuckle, imagining Lincoln's father, Thomas, grumbling about all this book learning, while secretly enjoying the calm that settles over the room when Nancy reads aloud. The debate among historians continues. Was it the hardship of frontier life that forged Lincoln's resilience, or the quiet assurance of his mother's stories? Or maybe it was both. The sharp edge of necessity softened by the balm of imagination. You can almost see the young boy's mind whirring, storing away every word, every lesson, for a future he can count yet imagine. As the candle burns lower, you sense the shift from story time to silence, the kind that invites dreams. Lincoln's earliest memories are stitched together from these moments. Soft voices, flickering shadows, the sense that even in the darkest night there is light enough to hope. You listen to the wind outside, wondering if it sounds the same across centuries. Maybe you too have a memory of a bedtime story, a voice in the dark that made the world feel safe. Lincolnwood's journey begins here, in this humble cabin, with a heart full of questions, and a mind hungry for answers. And as you drift in this space between waking and sleep, you realize that every leader, every storyteller starts as a listener, curled up in the dark, waiting for the next tale to begin. You find yourself lingering in that log cabin, the candle now a stub, but the night still young. Young Abraham, unable to sleep, sneaks a battered book from beneath his straw pillow. The moonlight, streaming through the cracks in the wall, becomes his reading lamp. You might chuckle. Who needs blue light glasses when your only screen is the pale face of the moon? Utters pure. Lincoln's eyes strain in the dimness, but he's determined to devour every word. This is where you see the first flicker of his legendary resilience. Lincoln knows love for books is no secret. He once famously said, "My best friend is a person who will give me a book I have not read." Scholars still debate whether it was the scarcity of books or the sheer loneliness of the frontier that made Lincoln such a voracious reader. Either way, you can almost hear the soft rustle of pages as he turns them, careful not to wake his sleeping family. Tonight, the book is a biography of George Washington, a borrowed treasure, its pages thumbed and worn. You imagine Abraham tracing the words with a finger, his mind wandering far from the confines of the cabin. He reads of battles, of courage, of a leader who shaped a nation, and you sense the seeds of ambition being quietly sown, the well-known fact. Lincoln would later credit these moonlit readings with shaping his character and his sense of justice. Less well-known is the quirky way he sometimes recite passages aloud to the family cow, who, let's be honest, was probably the most patient audience in Indiana. You feel the cold seeping through the floorboards, the night pressing in. But Lincoln is undeterred. He wraps himself tighter in his thin blanket, eyes shining with the thrill of discovery. You might be tempted to reach for a snack at this point. Lincoln, too, was known to nibble on a crust of bread while reading, a habit that would later morph into his penchant for late-night apples in the White House. Some say it was his way of keeping the hunger for knowledge alive, even when his stomach rumbled. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's self-taught education made him more empathetic as a leader or simply more stubborn. What's certain is that these nights of solitary study honed his ability to focus, to persist, and to find solace in words when the world outside grew harsh. You picture him, years later, poring over legal texts by lamplight, his mind still lit by the same quiet fire. The moon shifts, casting new patterns on the walls. Lincoln, little sister, Sarah, stirs in her sleep, mumbling something about a fox in the henhouse. Abe smiles, tucks the book away, and lets his mind wander. Maybe he dreams of distant cities, or of standing before a crowd, his voice steady and sure. Maybe he just dreams of a world where stories are never in short supply. You, too, might remember a night spent reading under the covers, the thrill of a story too good to put down. Lincoln's journey is familiar in this way. Each of us, at some point, has sought comfort in the pages of a book, found courage in the adventures of others. You settle into the rhythm of the night, the gentle pulse of hope and curiosity that beats beneath every quiet act of learning. As the first light of dawn creeps into the cabin, Lincoln finally closes his eyes, the words of Washington's biography echoing in his mind. But he does know it yet. But these moonlit hours will become the foundation of his leadership, the wellspring of his calm resolve. And you, drifting alongside him, can almost feel the weight of possibility in the air. The sense that even the smallest, quietest moments can shape the course of history. You step quietly into the next chapter of Lincoln's life, where the world has grown a little bigger, but the nights remain just as long and thoughtful. Imagine yourself slipping out onto the dew-soaked grass with young Abraham, the hush of the household left behind, and the stars above, so bright you could almost read by their light. And there's a peculiar peace in these solitary walks, Lincoln's favorite time to let his mind roam free, far from the noise and bustle of daily chores. If you ever tried to solve life's big mysteries while taking out the trash at midnight, you in good company. Lincoln's habit of wandering alone at night is well documented. He would pace back and forth, sometimes talking to himself, sometimes just listening to the symphony of crickets and distant barking dogs. Lincoln, scholars still debate whether these solitary strolls were a sign of melancholy or a source of strength. What's certain is that these moments of quiet reflection became a lifelong practice, a way for Lincoln to make sense of a world that rarely made sense. You can almost hear the soft crunch of leaves beneath his boots, the gentle sigh of wind in the trees. Lincoln's mind is a busy place, even when the world outside is calm. He puzzles over questions of right and wrong, of fairness and fate. He wonders about the future, about his place in it, and about the stories he's read by moonlight. Sometimes he composes little speeches in his head, practicing the art of persuasion on the silent fields and indifferent cows. You might smile at the thought of a future president rehearsing his arguments to an audience of cornstalks. A well-known fact. Lincoln's ability to think deeply and independently was one of his defining traits as a leader. He was famous for his long pauses before answering difficult questions, a habit that sometimes drove his colleagues to distraction. But here's a quirkier detail. On more than one occasion, Lincoln's nocturnal walks ended with him getting lost, only to be found hours later, still deep in thought, by a concerned neighbor or family member. Apparently, even future presidents can lose track of time when they are chasing big ideas. You follow Lincoln as he climbs a small hill, the horizon stretching endlessly before him. He sits, knees hugged to his chest, and gazes up at the stars. The Milky Way spills across the sky, a reminder that the universe is vast and full of mysteries. Lincoln is comforted by this thought. His troubles seem smaller beneath the immensity of the night. You might relate. Sometimes all it takes is a little stargazing to put things in perspective. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's solitary nature made him a better leader or simply more enigmatic. Was it his ability to listen to his own thoughts, to trust his inner compass, that set him apart? Or did these long, lonely nights leave him vulnerable to doubt and despair? The answer, as always, is probably a bit of both. But as you sit beside him in the darkness, you sense that this quiet time is essential, a chance to recharge, to dream, and to prepare for the challenges ahead. Lincoln stands, brushes the dew from his trousers, and heads back toward the warm glow of the cabin. His mind is clearer now, his heart a little lighter. He knows that tomorrow will bring new trials, but for tonight he is content to simply be a solitary walker beneath the stars, searching for answers in the silence. You too might find comfort in these moments of stillness. The world can wait. For now, you are exactly where you need to be, lost in thought, wrapped in the quiet magic of the night, and walking alongside a boy who will one day change the world. You slip into the hush of another night, the world outside the Lincoln cabin wrapped in the soft velvet of darkness. Abraham, now a little older, sits at a rickety wooden table, the glow of a single candle illuminating his face. The rest of the household is asleep, breaths slow and even, but Lincoln's mind is restless. Tonight, he's not reading. He's writing. You watch as he dips a quill into ink, the tip scratching quietly across a scrap of paper. These are not letters meant for the postman. They rear letters never sent, written only for the comfort of the night. It's a little-known fact that Lincoln, even as a young man, would write out his feelings, frustrations, and hopes in letters he never intended anyone to see. Scholars still debate whether this habit was a form of self-therapy, or just a way to practice his famously precise prose. Either way, you can almost feel the relief in the room as he pours his thoughts onto the page, the worries of the day dissolving with every line. Tonight's letter is addressed to no one in particular, perhaps a future self, perhaps a friend he's yet to meet. He writes about the ache of missing his mother, about the struggle to understand his father, about the loneliness that sometimes presses in so close it feels like a second skin. You might smile, recognizing that impulse to write out what you can say aloud. Lincoln's words are honest, unguarded, sometimes even a little funny. He jokes about the family pig, terrible manners, and wonders if there's a polite way to ask a neighbor to stop borrowing his axe. A well-known literary fact. Lincoln's letters as president are famous for their clarity, wit, and warmth. But it's these unsent letters from his youth that reveal the roots of that skill. He learned early that words could be a refuge, a way to make sense of chaos and confusion. And here, a quirky detail. Some of Lincoln's unsent letters were discovered years later, tucked into the pages of old books or hidden in the lining of a trunk. Imagine stumbling upon a note from a young Abraham Lincoln, written in the dead of night, and realizing you are holding a piece of history that was never meant to be found. You listen to the gentle scratch of the quill, the soft sigh of the wind outside. Lincoln pauses, taps the feather against his chin, and stares into the candle flame. He wonders if anyone will ever understand him, if his dreams are too big for a boy from the backwoods. He writes it all down, every hope and every doubt, then folds the letter and tucks it away. The act itself is enough. The words don't need to travel any further than the edge of his desk. Scholars still debate whether these private writings were practice for Lincoln's later speeches, or simply a way to lighten the burden of solitude. What's certain is that the habit of reflection, of writing to no one and everyone, became a cornerstone of his leadership. You might even try it yourself sometime. Write a letter you never intend to send, and see what truths bubble up from the quiet corners of your mind. Lincoln blows out the candle, the room plunging into darkness. He lies awake for a while, listening to the night, feeling a little less alone. The unsent letters are tucked safely away, their secrets known only to him, and now to you. You drift with him into sleep, comforted by the knowledge that sometimes the words we keep to ourselves are the ones that shape us most. You find yourself in the gentle hush of another evening, the air tinged with the scent of wood smoke and the faintest trace of wildflowers drifting in from the field. Abraham Lincoln sits in a straight-backed chair, elbows on knees, hands folded, his gaze fixed on the flickering fire. The cabin is quiet, save for the occasional pop from the hearth and the rhythmic breathing of his family asleep nearby. You notice something about Lincoln in these moments. He's not always quick to speak. In fact, he's famous for his silences, those long, thoughtful pauses that seem to stretch out forever. If you ever paused so long in a conversation that someone checked to see if you've fallen asleep, you're in good company. The power of a pause. Lincoln superpower. Really. It's a well-known literary fact that Lincoln's speeches and debates were marked by these careful silences. He let a question hang in the air, sometimes for so long that his opponents grew nervous or impatient. But Lincoln wasn't stalling. He was thinking, weighing every word, considering every angle. Scholars still debate whether this habit was a natural part of his personality or a deliberate strategy he owned over years of public speaking. Their way. It became a hallmark of his leadership style, a quiet confidence that said, "Ensta Bienser when I'm ready." You watch as Lincoln, lost in thought, lets the firelight dance across his features when he's replaying the events of the day in his mind. Maybe a disagreement with his father, a story he heard in town, or a passage from a book that left him pondering. He doesn't rush to judgment. Instead, he lets the question simmer, trusting that the right answer will come if he's patient enough. You might laugh, thinking of all the times you blurted out the first thing that came to mind, only to wish you waited for a better thought to arrive. Here's a quirky detail. Lincoln's friends and colleagues often joked about his enpon's long-winded silences. There's a story about a young lawyer who, after asking Lincoln for advice, sat in awkward silence for nearly 10 minutes before Lincoln finally spoke. When he did, his answer was so clear and ensured that the young man never forgot it. Lincoln's pauses weren't empty. They were full of consideration, empathy, and a deep respect for the power of words. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's patience in conversation was a sign of his introversion or a carefully cultivated tool for persuasion. Was he naturally slow to speak? Or did he learn that silence could be just as powerful as speech? Außer feet. Perhaps it was both. What's certain is that Lincoln's ability to wait, to listen, and to reflect made him a leader people trusted, even when they didn't always understand his methods. You settle into the rhythm of the evening, the fire crackling softly, the world outside fading into darkness. And Lincoln's quiet presence fills the room, a reminder that sometimes the best way to lead is to listen first and speak second. You might try it yourself the next time you're faced with a tricky question. Let the silence do some of the heavy lifting. As the fire burns low, Lincoln finally rises, stretches, and heads to bed. His mind is still turning over the day's events, but he's at peace with the uncertainty. He knows that answers don't always come right away, and that the power of a pause, after all, is that it gives you space to find the truth. You drift off with him, the quiet confidence of his leadership wrapping around you like a warm blanket. In a world that was always rushing, Lincoln's calm, measured approach feels like a balm, a gentle reminder that sometimes saying nothing at all is the wisest choice of all. You slip into another evening. The world outside the Lincoln home, steeped in shadow and soft with the promise of rest. But inside, there's a gentle flicker of mischief in the air. Abraham, now a young man with a gangly frame and a face that's learned to wear both sorrow and humor, is sitting by the fire with a few friends. The hour is late, but the room is alive with the sound of quiet laughter. If you ever found yourself telling jokes long past bedtime, you fall fit right in here. Lincoln's sense of humor is legendary, a well-known fact that even his political rivals grudgingly admired. He could disarm a tense room with a single well-timed story, and his jokes were often as gentle as they were clever. Tonight, he's spinning a yarn about a neighbor's runaway pig, the kind of tale that starts slow but ends with everyone clutching their sides. You might chuckle too, picturing the future president acting out the part of the pig, snorting and stumbling around the fire. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's humor was a natural gift or a shield he built to protect himself from life's darker moments. What's certain is that laughter was a vital part of his nightly routine, especially during the hardest years. He'd tell stories to his friends, his law partners, even strangers at the local inn. Anyone who needed a reason to smile. Here's a quirky detail. Lincoln's favorite joke involved a frog, a preacher, and a very confused chicken. The punchline has been lost to history, but the memory of his laughter lingers. You watch as the room glows with warmth, the worries of the day melting away in the face of Lincoln's gentle wit. He's not afraid to poke fun at himself either. He'll joke about his height, his awkwardness, his homespun clothes. It's a reminder that even great leaders have their insecurities, and that humor can turn vulnerability into strength. You might try it yourself next time you feeling nervous. Tell a joke, even if it only to yourself. Lincoln's friends beg him for one more story, and he obliges with a tale about a stubborn mule and a very muddy road. The laughter that follows is soft but sincere, echoing through the quiet night. You sense that these moments of joy are as important as any speech or debate. They were the glue that binds friends together, the light that keeps darkness at bay. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's penchant for humor helped him cope with the immense pressures of leadership, or simply masked his deeper sorrows. Perhaps it was both. What's clear is that his laughter was never cruel. It was always a bridge, a way to connect with others and remind them that, no matter how heavy the burden, there's still room for a little lightness. As the fire dies down and his friends drift off to sleep, Lincoln sits quietly for a moment, a soft smile lingering on his lips. The room is peaceful, the night deep and still. He knows that tomorrow will bring new challenges, but for now he's content to let laughter be his lullaby. You too might find comfort in these late-night stories, the kind that make you forget your worries, if only for a little while. As you drift towards sleep, Lincoln's laughter follows you, gentle and reassuring, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a reason to smile. You slip further into the night, where the line between dreams and waking blurs like mist over the prairie. Abraham Lincoln, now a man with the cares of the world beginning to settle on his shoulders, lies awake in a narrow bed. The room is dark, save for a sliver of moonlight pooling on the floor. You sense the heaviness in the air, the kind that comes when the mind refuses to rest. If you've ever stared at the ceiling, replaying the day or worrying about tomorrow, you in familiar company. Lincoln's dreams and nightmares are the stuff of legend. A well-known literary fact is that he often spoke of his dreams, sometimes with a seriousness that surprised even his closest friends. One of his most famous dreams, recounted to his cabinet just days before his death,
involved wandering the White House and discovering mourners gathered around a covered corpse. Himself, as it turned out. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln truly believed his dreams were prophetic, or if he simply found comfort in sharing them, using the language of dreams to process his anxieties.
But here, a quirkier detail. Lincoln kept a sort of dream journal, scribbling down his nighttime visions on scraps of paper, sometimes in the margins of legal documents or the backs of envelopes. These notes weren't always somber.
Once, he described a dream where he was chased by a giant talking turkey, a detail he shared with Mary, who, according to family lore, laughed so hard she nearly fell out of bed. You might smile, imagining the President of the United States haunted not by political intrigue, but by poultry.
Tonight, Lincoln's mind drifts between memory and imagination. He revisits his childhood, the faces of loved ones lost, the scent of spring rain on the Illinois prairie. Sometimes his dreams are filled with hope, visions of the country healed, of laughter echoing through the White House halls.
Other nights, shadows creep in, and he wakes with a start, heart pounding, the weight of the nation pressing down on his chest. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's troubled sleep was a symptom of his melancholy or a necessary outlet for the burdens he carried. Did his nighttime visions sharpen his empathy, or simply remind him of the limits of his power, or smeared, perhaps both? What's certain is that Lincoln never dismissed his dreams as mere nonsense. He saw them as messages, sometimes warnings, sometimes encouragements, always worth pondering in the quiet hours before dawn. You watch as Lincoln sits up, rubbing his eyes, reaching for a pencil and scrap of paper. He jots down a few lines, something about a river, a bridge, a crowd cheering on the far shore. He tucks the note away, a small talisman against the darkness. You might try this yourself. Keep a notebook by your bed, and see what stories your dreams have to tell. Who knows? Maybe you discover a hidden message, or at least a good laugh to share over breakfast. As the night deepens, Lincoln finally drifts into a gentler sleep, the edges of his dreams softened by the knowledge that come morning, he'll face the world anew. You, too, let yourself sink into the comfort of your own bed, knowing that even the greatest leaders have restless nights, and that sometimes the answers you seek arrive only when you close your eyes. You find yourself in the amber glow of another late night, this time in the heart of Washington, D.C. The world outside the White House is hushed, the city's restless energy softened by the hour.
Inside, Abraham Lincoln sits with his cabinet, the room lit by the golden flicker of a fireplace and the soft scratch of pens on paper. These are the famous fireside cabinet meetings, moments when history pivots not with thunder, but with the gentle murmur of voices in the dark.
If you have ever tried to solve a big problem with friends over midnight snacks, you'll recognize the magic of these hours. It's a well-known literary fact that Lincoln preferred to hold many of his most important meetings at night, when the demands of the day had faded and the mind could work in peace.
The Emancipation Proclamation, perhaps his most significant act, was drafted and debated in the soft glow of these late hours. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln chose these times for their strategic quiet or simply because his mind was sharpest when the world was still.
Either way, you can almost hear the low hum of conversation, the clink of a teacup, the rustle of papers as ideas are weighed and measured. Tonight, the cabinet gathers around the fire, their faces etched with fatigue and hope. Lincoln listens more than he speaks,
his famous pauses stretching into the night. He lets his advisors argue and fret, then, in a moment of calm, offers a story, a parable, really, about a farmer, a storm, and the wisdom of patience. His colleagues groan, but the tension breaks, and the hard decisions come a little easier. Here's a quirky detail. Lincoln was known to bring his own mug of hot coffee to these meetings. Sometimes spiking it with a splash of milk and a spoonful of molasses. He claimed it kept his mind alert, though some suspected it was just an excuse for a midnight treat. As the meeting drifts on, the conversation turns to poetry, another of Lincoln's nighttime comforts. He recites a few lines from his favorite poet, Robert Burns, his voice soft but steady. The room grows silent, the burdens of leadership momentarily eased by the beauty of verse. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's love of poetry made him a more compassionate leader or simply offered him a brief escape from the weight of his office. Perhaps it did both. What's clear is that these fireside gatherings were as much about soothing the soul as they were about shaping the nation. You watch as the cabinet members, one by one, rise and take their leave, their faces a little lighter than when they arrived. Lincoln lingers by the fire, staring into the embers, lost in thought. He knows that tomorrow will bring new challenges, but for now, he finds comfort in the quiet company of friends and the gentle glow of the hearth. You, too, might find solace in these late-night conversations, in the warmth of shared burdens, the comfort of a good story, and the simple pleasure of a hot drink. As you drift toward sleep, the echoes of Lincoln's fireside meetings follow you, a reminder that even the hardest decisions can be made a little softer by the light of friendship and the calm of night. You linger in the gentle hush that follows those fireside meetings, the White House now wrapped in the quiet that only comes after big decisions and long conversations. Abraham Lincoln, alone at last, retreats to his study. The hour is late, but his mind is restless, searching for balm. Tonight, he reaches for a slim volume of poetry, its pages worn from years of use. You can almost hear the soft thud as he settles into a creaky chair, the book open in his lap. If you ever found comfort in the rhythm of a poem when you couldn't asleep, you will understand why Lincoln turned to verse. It's a well-known literary fact that Lincoln adored poetry, especially the works of Robert Burns, Shakespeare, and Lord Byron. He memorized whole passages, reciting them from memory to soothe his nerves or to share a moment of beauty with a friend. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's love of poetry was a private escape or a public tool, a way to connect with others through shared language. Either way, you sense the power of words in this quiet room, the way a well-turned phrase can settle a restless heart. Tonight, Lincoln reads a few lines from Burns, the Scottish poet whose simple wisdom always seems to cut through the noise. He mouths the words silently, letting them roll through his mind like a lullaby. Here's a quirky detail. Lincoln once attended a Burns supper in Illinois, where he recited "Umbuan a man for a lat," with such feeling that a Scottish immigrant wept into his punch. The president's accent was questionable, but his sincerity was not. You watch as Lincoln closes his eyes, letting the poetry wash over him. The troubles of the nation recede for a moment, replaced by images of green hills, rushing rivers, and the promise of better days. He thinks of his own writing, the speeches and letters that have shaped the course of history. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's poetic sensibility made his speeches more memorable or simply more melancholy. Perhaps it did both. What certain is that his words, like the poems he loved, have endured far beyond his own lifetime. You might try it yourself. Keep a favored poem by your bedside, a few lines to recite when sleep won't come. Lincoln believed that poetry could heal, that it could remind us of our shared humanity even in the darkest times, and as he closes the book and sets it aside, you sense a deep calm settling over him, the kind that comes from knowing you are not alone in your struggles. The night grows quieter still, the only sound the distant tick of a clock. Lincoln rises, stretches, and gazes out the window at the sleeping city. He knows that morning will bring new challenges, but for now he is content to let poetry be his companion. You too can let the music of words carry you into sleep, trusting that the wisdom of poets and presidents will keep you company through the night. You find yourself in the gentle blue hush of another late night, the White House now a patchwork of shadow and soft lamplight. Abraham Lincoln, weary but not yet ready for sleep, sits at his desk with a stack of paper and a battered pen. Tonight, he's not writing speeches or proclamations. He's penning a letter to Mary, his wife, the woman who knows both his public burdens and his private quirks. If you ever sent a late night text just to say you thinking of someone, you in good company here. It's a well-known literary fact that Lincoln and Mary Todd exchanged hundreds of letters throughout their marriage, even during the busiest and most difficult years. Their correspondence was sometimes formal, sometimes playful, but always revealing of the deep connection they shared. Scholars still debate whether these letters show a marriage of true minds or one marked by constant friction and misunderstanding. The truth, as always, is tangled somewhere in between. A love story shaped by history, hardship, and the quiet moments between the headlines. Tonight's letter is a little different. Lincoln's pen scratches out a gentle apology for missing dinner, a wry observation about the state of his socks. One is more whole than hosiery, and a tender wish that Mary might find a moment of peace in the chaos of the White House. Here's a quirky detail. Lincoln was known for slipping little jokes and doodles into his notes to Mary, once sketching a cartoon of himself hiding behind a door to avoid a particularly boring reception. You might smile, imagining the President of the United States sneaking a silly drawing into an envelope, hoping for a laugh. As he writes, Lincoln pauses often, searching for the right words. He knows Mary's moods, as well as his own, knows that sometimes a letter can smooth over a rough day, or spark a much-needed smile. He tucks in a line of poetry, a habit he'd kept since their courting days, and signs off with a flourish that half joke, half genuine affection. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's letters to Mary were a window into his soul, or simply a way to keep the peace at home. What's certain is that these nighttime notes reveal a man who, despite the weight of the world, never lost sight of the small human connections that make life worth living. You too might think of someone you'd like to write to. A friend, a partner, a family member. There's something soothing about putting thoughts to paper, about reaching across the quiet of the night with a few honest words. Lincoln seals the envelope, sets it aside for the morning, and leans back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The White House is silent, the city beyond it sleeping. Lincoln's heart is lighter for having shared his thoughts, his burdens eased by the simple act of writing to someone he loves. You let yourself drift in that same gentle calm, knowing that sometimes the quietest gestures are the ones that matter most. You slip into the slow, anxious rhythm of another night, the kind that stretches on and on, each minute ticking by with agonizing patience. Abraham Lincoln sits by the window, his silhouette outlined by the faint glow of a lantern. And the city outside is silent, but inside the White House the air is thick with anticipation. Lincoln is waiting for news from distant battlefields, for a knock at the door, for a letter that might change everything. If you ever stared at your phone, willing a message to appear, you recognize the ache of these endless hours. It's a well-known literary fact that Lincoln spent countless nights in this state of suspended animation, awaiting word from his generals during the Civil War. He would pace the halls, sometimes barefoot, sometimes barefoot, sometimes still dressed in the same rumpled suit. Scholars still debate whether these sleepless nights made Lincoln a more empathetic leader, or whether they simply wore him down, leaving him hollow-eyed and haunted. Neither way, you can feel the weight of his responsibility pressing in from all sides. Tonight, the news is slow to come. Lincoln tries to distract himself with a book, but the words swim on the page. He writes a few lines of poetry, then sets the pen aside. He listens to the clock ticking, the distant rumble of a carriage on Pennsylvania Avenue, the soft creak of the floorboards as a servant passes by. Here's a quirky detail. On especially anxious nights, Lincoln was known to wander down to the telegraph office himself, sometimes in his slippers, to read the latest dispatches firsthand. The clerks would look up in surprise to find the president standing quietly in the doorway, hair tousled, eyes searching for any scrap of hope. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's habit of waiting, of refusing to act until he had all the facts, was a strength or a weakness. Was he cautious, or simply paralyzed by the enormity of his decisions? Perhaps it was both. What's certain is that these nights of waiting became a crucible, forging a patience and steadiness that would define his presidency. You watch as Lincoln returns to the window, his breath fogging the glass. He murmurs a prayer for the soldiers, for their families, for the country he loves. He thinks of his own sons, asleep upstairs, and wonders what kind of world they'll inherit. The night drags on, each moment heavy with uncertainty. You might remember your own nights of waiting for good news, for bad news, for any news at all. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes in these hours, a sharpening of the senses, a reminder that hope is sometimes the only thing that keeps us going. Lincoln clings to that hope, even as the sky begins to lighten and the first birds begin to sing. At last, a knock at the door, a messenger with a telegram. Lincoln doth's hands tremble as he breaks the seal, his eyes scanning the words. Relief or sorrow or something in between, it doesn't matter, the waiting is over. For now, you let yourself breathe out, the tension of the night easing. Lincoln, too, allows himself a moment of rest, knowing that the hardest part is often not the battle itself, but the long, silent hours before the news arrives. You drift into the quietest hours of the night, where the world outside the White House is little more than a hush of distant hoofbeats and the occasional call of a night bird. Inside, Abraham Lincoln sits at his desk, a single lamp casting a golden pool of light across stacks of paper. These are the hours when history is written in silence, when the most momentous decisions are born not in thunder, but in the steady scratch of a pen and the slow, careful weighing of conscience. Tonight, Lincoln is alone. The Emancipation Proclamation spread before him. It's a well-known literary fact that this document, one of the most significant in American history, was drafted, revised, and pondered over during countless sleepless nights.
The scholars still debate whether Lincoln's decision to sign it was driven more by moral conviction or political necessity, but in these quiet hours, you sense the answer is both. A heart wrestling with the weight of justice, and a mind calculating the risks and hopes of a nation at war. And Lincoln reads and rereads the words, searching for the right tone, firm but compassionate, resolute but hopeful. He knows that every phrase will echo through history, that the fate of millions hinges on the lines before him. Here's a quirky detail. Lincoln, ever the perfectionist, would sometimes read his drafts aloud to the family cat, Tabby, who, unlike the cabinet, never interrupted or offered unsolicited advice. You might smile at the image of the president, deep in thought, with a tabby cat curled in his lap as he rehearses the language of freedom. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's long nights of revision were a sign of indecision or the mark of a leader determined to get it right. Was he haunted by the enormity of the task, or simply unwilling to let a single word go unexamined? Perhaps it was both. What's clear is that the Emancipation Proclamation was not born in a moment of passion, but in the slow, deliberate hours when the world was asleep, and only the lamp and the pen kept vigil. You watch as Lincoln finally sets down his pen, rubbing his tired eyes. He gazes out the window at the sleeping city, knowing that when dawn comes, nothing will ever be the same. He whispers a few lines from Shakespeare, his favorite companion in moments of doubt, then folds the document and places it carefully in his desk. You might think of your own big decisions, the ones that kept you awake long after everyone else had gone to bed. There's a special kind of clarity that comes in the quiet, a sense that the world is holding its breath, waiting for you to act. Lincoln feels it too. The hush before history turns. As the night deepens, Lincoln allows himself a rare moment of peace. He has done what he can. The rest is in the hands of fate, and of the countless people whose lives will be forever changed by the words he's written tonight. You let yourself relax into the calm, trusting that sometimes the most powerful acts are born not in noise, but in the gentle persistence of a single steady heart. You drift with Lincoln into the gentle hours before dawn, when the world is at its softest, and even the hardest hearts can find a little room for mercy. The war rages on outside, but inside the White House, Abraham Lincoln sits quietly, a stack of letters before him. Tonight, he's not drafting laws or proclamations. He's considering the fates of men who have wronged, faltered, or simply found themselves on the wrong side of history. If you've ever wrestled with the choice to forgive, you'll recognize the weight in Lincoln's hands. It's a well-known literary fact that Lincoln was famous for his pardons and acts of forgiveness during the Civil War. Soldiers who deserted, young men who panicked in battle, even rivals who slandered him, many found unexpected mercy from the president's pen. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's clemency was a political calculation or the product of an unusually gentle soul. What's certain is that his willingness to forgive often baffled his cabinet and infuriated his generals, who sometimes accused him of being too soft for the times. Tonight, Lincoln reads a letter from a mother pleading for her son's life. He sets it aside, lost in thought. He remembers his own mother's voice, the stories she told of kindness and second chances. Here's a quirky detail. Lincoln once pardoned a soldier because the man's mother had made him promise as a boy never to fight on Sundays. Lincoln, amused and moved, wrote a note sparing the young man's life, on a Sunday, no less. You might smile,
picturing the president weighing such odd human details in the balance of justice. Scholars still debate whether these acts of mercy made Lincoln a stronger leader or left him vulnerable to criticism and disappointment. Was forgiveness a sign of strength or a dangerous indulgence in a time of war? Perhaps it was both. What's clear is that Lincoln's approach to leadership was shaped by a deep understanding of human frailty, a recognition that everyone, even a president, is flawed and in need of grace. Lincoln's pen hovers over another letter, this one from a rival who has spread rumors and sown discord, and he considers revenge, then sighs and writes a reply that is firm but fair, refusing to descend into bitterness. You might think of your own moments of restraint, the times you chose kindness over anger, and how those choices shaped not just your relationships, but your own sense of self. As the sun begins to rise, Lincoln gathers the letters, some signed with pardons, others with gentle refusals. He feels the burden of each decision, but also a quiet pride in having chosen mercy where others might have chosen retribution. You sense that this, more than any speech or law, is what sets Lincoln apart, a leadership rooted in the healing power of forgiveness. You let yourself relax into the softness of the morning, knowing that the world is a little kinder for these quiet acts of grace. Lincoln, too, finds a moment of peace, his heart lighter for having chosen the gentler path. You find yourself in the gentle hush of an April evening, the city of Washington settling into a rare, peaceful quiet. Abraham Lincoln, weary but content, prepares for a night at Ford's Theater. There's a sense of calm about him, a quiet resolve that seems to settle over his broad shoulders. If you've ever felt the stillness before a big moment, when the world seems to pause and hold its breath, you will know the feeling that fills the White House tonight. It's a well-known literary fact that Lincoln was a lover of the theater, finding solace and escape in the stories brought to life on stage. He attended performances whenever he could, often bringing Mary or a trusted friend, and was known for his deep, rumbling laughter at even the simplest jokes. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's frequent theater visits were an attempt to escape the pressures of office or a genuine passion for the arts. Perhaps it was both, a leader who needed more than most the healing balm of story and song. On the night, Lincoln dresses with care, choosing a simple black suit and his favorite stovepipe hat. Here's a quirky detail. He tucks a folded newspaper into his coat pocket, a habit he never quite broke, just in case he found a spare moment to read between acts. Mary fusses over his tie, and Lincoln, ever the gentle tease, promises not to fall asleep during the performance. You might smile, imagining the President of the United States sneaking a quick nap in the back row, though, as history tells us, he was always an attentive audience member. As the carriage rattles through the city streets, Lincoln gazes out the window, reflecting on the years that have passed. He thinks of the war's end, of the nation's wounds beginning to heal, of the hope that maybe, just maybe, peace is within reach. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln sensed the danger that awaited him that night, whether his calm was born of resignation or simply a deep, abiding faith that he had done his duty. What's certain is that those who saw him that evening remarked on his serenity, the way he seemed lighter, almost unburdened. At Ford's Theater, Lincoln settles into his seat, the world falling away as the actors take the stage. The laughter and applause, the flicker of candlelight on painted faces, the shared joy of a story well told, it all washes over him like a gentle tide. For a few precious hours, Lincoln is not a president or a symbol, but simply a man, lost in the magic of the moment. You, too, might remember a night at the theater, The hush before the curtain rises, the thrill of being part of something larger than yourself. Lincoln's final night is filled with this quiet wonder, a reminder that even in the midst of history's turning points, there is beauty and peace to be found. As the play unfolds, Lincoln's thoughts drift to his family, his friends, the people he has loved and lost. He feels a deep sense of gratitude, a quiet pride in the journey he has traveled. The world outside may be uncertain, but for now, he is at peace. You let yourself settle into this calm, the gentle rhythm of the evening, carrying you toward rest. Lincoln's story is nearly at its end, but his spirit, the quiet strength, the gentle humor, the unwavering hope, lingers on, a whisper in the night. You linger in the soft, echoing quiet that follows a life well lived. The city of Washington wrapped in the hush of midnight. Abraham Lincoln's final night has passed, but his presence remains, a gentle imprint on the world, as if his calm leadership still drifts through the corridors of time. If you've ever walked through an empty house after a celebration, feeling the warmth and laughter still hanging in the air, you understand the sense of peace that settles over this moment. It's a well-known literary fact that Lincoln's legacy is one of enduring calm and quiet strength. His words, spoken in speeches, letters, and private notes, have been quoted and cherished for generations, their wisdom echoing through classrooms, courtrooms, and quiet living rooms alike. And scholars still debate whether Lincoln's reputation for calm was an innate gift or a hard-won skill, forged in the fires of loss and hardship. Perhaps it was both. What certain is that his steady presence became a beacon for a nation in turmoil, a reminder that even the greatest storms can be weathered with patience and hope. You wander in your mind through the empty White House halls, the moonlight pooling on polished floors. The rooms are silent, but you can almost hear the faint scratch of Lincoln's pen, the low rumble of his laughter, the soft cadence of his voice reciting poetry in the dark. Here's a quirky detail. After Lincoln's death, his beloved horse, Old Bob, was led in the funeral procession, draped in a black mourning blanket. Some say the horse seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, bowing his head as if in silent tribute. You might smile at the thought of a president and his horse, both remembered for their quiet dignity. Scholars still debate whether Lincoln's leadership style would have suited a different era, or if it was uniquely suited to the chaos of his own time. Was his gentle approach a model for future leaders, or an anomaly never to be repeated? The discussions go on, but you sense that Lincoln's calm, his ability to pause, to forgive, to reflect, remains as relevant now as it was then. You let yourself drift through the echoes of Lincoln's life, feeling the gentle weight of his example. His story is not just one of war and politics, but of quiet moments, candlelit readings, unsent letters, late night laughter, and the soft, persistent hope that even the darkest night will give way to dawn. As you settle into sleep, Lincoln's legacy whispers to you that strength can be gentle, that leadership can be kind, and that the calmest voices often carry the farthest. The world outside is quiet, the night deep and still, and you are wrapped in the comfort of a story that will never truly end. And now, as the last echoes of Lincoln's story fade into the gentle hush of the night, you find yourself wrapped in a cocoon of calm. The world outside slows to a whisper, every sound softened, every worry gently set aside.
Picture the flicker of candlelight, the steady hush of distant rain, or the faint, reassuring tick of a clock in the next room. You breathe in, letting your chest rise and fall with the same slow rhythm that once soothed a weary president through endless nights.
Let your mind wander back to the quiet moments. A boy reading by moonlight, a leader pausing before he speaks, a gentle hand signing a letter of forgiveness. Each memory, each image is a soft blanket, tucking you in a little tighter, making the world feel safer and more peaceful.
You are not alone in the darkness. There are stories and voices, hopes and dreams, gently keeping you company as you drift. Every muscle relaxes, your thoughts growing lighter, your breath deeper. The night is long, but it is kind, and you are free to let go of the day's burdens.
Trust in the calm that Lincoln carried through his life, and let it guide you softly into sleep. The world will wait for you until morning. For now, you are safe, you are calm, and you are exactly where you need to be.